land. There will be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll gonna be singing in that land. Gonna be singing in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Phew, technology. It's great when it works. It's not so great when it doesn't work, but I'm glad we got that song. That's one of my favorites. Today's service is about what it means to believe in our second principle, the belief in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and how to turn that belief into activism. The children's version of this principle is simply that all people should be treated fairly and kindly. Now, for any parent or caregiver who's ever had to count out the number of French fries on a dinner plate or measure the spoonful size of scooped ice cream, you know that children have this very keen sense of fairness. They know whether they or other people are being treated fairly. Now, in talking with our RE kids and with my own children, it's really clear that they're kind of confused about why grown-ups don't treat everyone fairly and kindly. They want to know why some people don't believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. They want to know how to convince grown-ups that all people should be treated fairly and kindly. So kids, when you hear today's story, I want you to pay particular attention to the end. Because change only happens when we can get people to feel differently in their hearts about their beliefs and their behaviors. Activism brings about change only when we can get others to really hear us, to really see us, and to really understand us. Today's story comes from the All Folktales website, and it was shared with permission on the UUA website as part of their Tapestry of Faith curriculum. It's a story from Nigeria, and it goes like this. A long time ago, in the village of Ipetumoju, there lived a poor woman. This woman was so poor that she didn't have any soup for her iba. Now, iba is this starchy paste made from cassava flour, and it's rather unappetizing to eat all by itself. Across the street from this poor woman lived another woman who cooked egusi soup every day. And egusi soup contains all the rich protein, egusi seeds, vegetables, and even sometimes meat. One day, as the poor woman was sitting down to her only meal for the entire day, a small bowl of iba, the aroma from her neighbor's cooking wafted down through her window. Perhaps she will be kind enough to let me have a little soup for my iba, she thought. So she took her bowl of iba and headed over to her neighbor, who was busy stirring a pot of egusi soup. Please, may I have a little soup for my iba? The poor woman asked. The woman stirring the egusi soup looked up to see her raggedy-looking neighbor and replied, If you can't make your own egusi soup, then you don't deserve any. The poor woman went back to her own hut and sat down on her doorstep, where the aroma from her neighbor's egusi soup was very strong. She would scoop some iba up with her hands and inhale a big dose of the egusi soup aroma while she swallowed the lump of iba. The egusi woman, seeing this destitute neighbor eating her soup's aroma, got very angry. She ran out and yelled at the woman, Stop eating the aroma from my soup! But the poor woman didn't stop. She kept inhaling the aroma from the egusi soup while she ate her iba. She found the aroma from the soup very satisfying. Every day, whenever the rich aroma of agouti soup wafted into the poor woman's hut, she would quickly make a little bowl of iba and go outside and inhale the pleasant aroma. The agouti woman was getting very furious, and she decided to take her case to the Oba, the king of their village. This woman steals the aroma from my agouti soup to eat her iba. She must be punished, the agouti woman told the Oba. The Oba heard the story and agreed that the poor woman should indeed be punished for stealing the soup aroma, and he ordered the agouti woman to carry out the punishment. She stole your aroma, therefore you shall flog her shadow, the Oba told the agouti woman. You shall flog her shadow 40 times. And she was given a big stick with which to carry out her justice. The agouti woman, wielding her big stick to beat the poor woman's shadow, felt very foolish. She felt so foolish that she asked the poor woman for forgiveness, and she offered to give her real agouti soup from that day on.
Thank you, Jess. That spoke volumes. Thank you. During this next musical interlude, we invite you to write your joys and sorrows in the chat portion of your Zoom screen. The icon will either be on the top or bottom of your screen, and it will allow you to enter text into the panel where others can see it. At the end of the musical interlude, Reverend Fortune will read what you would share with the congregation gathered here today.
Good morning. Separated as we are by distance, we are joined this morning in spirit, brought together to seek comfort and encouragement and to share those things in our lives that bring us joy or cause us sorrow. I will now read aloud for all listening what you would share. Marcia Hannah writes that she is glad that her sister Jessica is back home after being evacuated for wildfires last week. Steve and Palma are happy that they get to see the grandkids at the house on Friday. Betsy Erba will be happy when school is over, and it almost is. Melissa reports that her son Colin in California had car trouble this past week and has now acquired a 2007 Volkswagen Rabbit to replace his old Volkswagen Beetle. Let's see, this is fantastic. John and Betsy Seawright, this week we'll celebrate 60 years together. Can we all just give them our blessing? How wonderful is that? That just makes me all verklempt. Cecile said that an Oscar is thankful for the fact that he is still healthy and also glad that school is almost over. Sheila is saddened by yet another attack on transgender folks, and Housing and Urban Development is now putting discrimination proposals online, coupled with what has already happened. Judy Pereira is joyful and thankful for beautiful weather and swimming and lots of time on little rivers and more in her little kayak, I imagine. I invite you now to join me in a spirit of prayer. Blessed and holy creation, universe of wonder, mystery beyond definition and name, we share today our joys and sorrows, longing for the time when we can once more place stones in the water by our windows and around the light of our chalice. Our hearts are touched by this shared ritual and we are connected. We hold in our hearts this morning all those who are sick and suffering with the coronavirus. We hold in our hearts the families of loved ones of more than 100,000 people who have died of the virus and the 2 million people who've been diagnosed. We hold in our hearts the workers who've been laid off, the contractors who are out of work with no access to unemployment benefits. We pray for those who are lonely and starved for human touch in this time of social distancing. We pray for the thousands of immigrant children and families still being held in concentration camps here in the United States. They have not been released or deported or allowed medical attention. They are still imprisoned and guarded by U.S. soldiers. We pray for the people of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the current occupant has scheduled his first campaign rally on the day after Juneteenth, which is the anniversary of the date when enslaved people in the South learned of their emancipation. Tulsa, you may remember, is focused keenly on the anniversary 2 weeks ago of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1919 and is acutely aware that this is an additional insult layered upon their hearts by the president. We mourn this week the loss of retired minister David Park, who wrote in 1957 The Epic of Unitarianism, which is a classic of Unitarian history from before the Unitarian Universalist Association was formed. He was a pastor at a little church in New Hampshire when he retired, and that town and those folks are mourning him today. We pray for the family and community of the 2 Black trans women murdered this week. Rhea Milton in Ohio and Dominique Ramey Fells in Philadelphia. They are the 13th and 14th transgender people killed in the United States this year. Let us remember their names. For the trans and non-binary people who this week were stripped of their right to be provided treatment by medical personnel in hospitals and in doctors' offices. It is the month in which the United States and other countries around the world celebrate Pride in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and expanded community. It is a difficult month for Pride. We pray for those in the Black Lives Matter uprising who are working to fight police brutality in the United States. And we celebrate the work done by members of this congregation in support of the movement for Black lives, and for the Eastern Service Workers, and for the Allies in Caring, and for the so many ways that this congregation shows up and shows how to live our values. We are grateful to the people all over the world who are demonstrating in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, even as far away as New Zealand, where they recognize that armed police are a danger. The whole world is watching what is happening here, and we are not alone or without allies. We pray, as we do every week, for the continued health and long life of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, on whose shoulders democracy rests for at least another year. We pray for those who are apart from us, whether by distance, time, or conflict unresolved. We pray for those who thirst, whether for water, dignity, or justice. we pray for our small, blue, fragile planet. We offer all of these and those joys and sorrows that remain unspoken in our hearts into the care of the universe. May our joys be multiplied and our sorrows diminished in this sharing. Amen.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing. There's a river flowing. There's a river flowing in my soul.
We now take a moment to give and receive the morning offering. That looks a little different when we are separated by distance. Rather than placing a check or cash in the basket, I ask you to consider a generosity practice of sending a check to our P.O. box or arranging a regular payment be sent through your bank. You can also use the donate button on our website to make a contribution. Your financial support is essential since 80% of our income to pay expenses comes from the contributions of our members and friends. We honor the voluntary generosity of the congregation and remind you that no matter how those gifts are offered, they are always most gratefully received.
Thank Our reading today is a piece called On Which Our Enlightenment Depends. It is an excerpt from Cultivating a Compassionate Heart by Bhikshuni Thupten Chodron. At the end of the reading, we will enter a time of quiet contemplation before today's sermon. Often we see other sentient beings as hassles. This mosquito is disturbing me. Those politicians are corrupt. Why can't my colleagues do their work correctly? And so on. But when we see sentient beings as being more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, our perspective completely changes. For example, when we look at a fly buzzing around, we train ourselves to think, my enlightenment depends on that fly. This isn't fanciful thinking because, in fact, our enlightenment does depend on that fly. If that fly isn't included in our bodhicitta, then we don't have bodhicitta, and we won't receive the wonderful results of generating bodhicitta, the tremendous purification and creation of positive potential. Imagine training your mind so that when you look at every single living being, you think, my enlightenment depends on that being. The drunk who just got on the bus, my enlightenment depends on him. The soldier in Iraq, my enlightenment depends on him. My brothers and sisters, the teller at the bank, the janitor at my workplace, the President of the United States, the suicide bombers in the Middle East, the slug in my garden, my 8th grade boyfriend, the babysitter when I was a kid. My enlightenment depends on each of them. All sentient beings are actually that precious to us.
We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. These affirmative statements of principles were originally ratified by vote of the delegates to the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1985. They're occasionally updated by subsequent votes of the delegates at General Assembly. It is worth noting that in our principles, as they currently exist, justice is mentioned 3 times and compassion is mentioned twice. And neither God nor love is mentioned at all. In the combined text of the principles, their sources, and our purposes, the word free or freedom is mentioned twice, but spirit or spiritual is mentioned 5 times, as is congregation. Words like right or wrong, sin, salvation, heaven, and hell are not mentioned. Some may know that an 8th principle is currently in the approval process. That 8th principle states, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Each addition or change to our bylaws must be approved by affirmative votes at 2 different General Assemblies. This proposed 8th principle now awaits a 2nd affirmative vote of the delegates. So this morning's lesson in denominational structure and function is prompted by a couple of things, not the least of which is this month's theme of compassion, but also by the annual exercise of our democratic process in our congregations and at the denominational level in our General Assembly, which is coming up in a couple weeks. The annual meeting of our congregation happens next week after worship, and is when you, as members of the congregation, will decide whether to approve a slate of nominated leaders to serve in various terms on the Board of Trustees, the Committee on Ministry, and the Nominating Committee, as well as considering and approving a budget for fiscal year 2020 to 21. But back to compassion. The word compassion has roots in both Latin, patiri, and Greek, pathin, which mean to suffer or endure something, to experience a thing. With the prefix co or com, it emerges as a term meaning to experience something with someone else, often interpreted as something unpleasant or something to be endured, and to do that with someone. But the point of the word compassion is the idea of being able to feel what others are feeling, not in a codependent sort of way, but to put your heart with theirs, to be able to imagine what it is that the other feels, and to share in that experience so that they are not alone. Noted scholar and author Karen Armstrong, in her book 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, argues that compassion is a universally human trait, that it is present in all cultures and among all populations. Every religious or philosophical school of thought through the ages has some version of the golden rule: do unto others as you want done unto you. She traced this concept back to Confucius in ancient China, then later to Buddha, then to the three Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and to all of the later discovered, meaning found by white people, traditions and various indigenous peoples and cultures around the world. And every single one has this standard of behavior. Imagine what it's like to be the other person and treat them as you would like to be treated. The understanding, of course, is that we would like to be treated with kindness and generosity as opposed to cruelty and avarice. Thus, compassion is inherent in human nature, says Armstrong. But there's another school of thought that says that compassion is the rare exception to humanity's more basic instincts and behaviors. Humans are, after all, mammals, animals. We must compete with one another in often brutal and deadly ways. That is how the fittest survive. Compassion, that school argues, goes at cross purposes to success and survival. So yes and no, because evolution is real. And the influence of our reptilian brains is also quite real. The hypothalamus, or the lizard brain as it is sometimes called, is that ancient part of our psychology, or physiology, that focuses on what Karen Armstrong calls the 4 F's of survival: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and for want of a more basic word, reproduction. Armstrong writes, "Our reptilian ancestors were, therefore, interested only in status, power, control, territory, sex, personal gain, and survival. Homo sapiens inherited these neurological systems. They are located in the hypothalamus at the base of the brain, and it is thanks to them that our species survived. Over the millennia, however, human beings also evolved a new brain, the neocortex, home of the reasoning powers that enable us to reflect on the world and on ourselves, and to stand back from these instinctive, primitive passions." End quote. Those primitive passions, so necessary for survival, still operate in our brains and our culture, reinforced by our capitalist economy that rewards individual achievement above all else. But the ability to reflect upon ourselves is unique, and the capacity to differentiate ourselves and our own needs from others and their needs, and further, the ability to put ourselves mentally and emotionally in the place of our neighbors, that is one of the advanced functions of the neocortex that both separates us from many other animals, note I did not say all, and permits us to feel and express compassion or to be with someone in their experience and emotions. Now, this has been a lot of smart words explaining the reasons and the methods for how humans are able to feel compassion. But what does compassion look like in action? Bhikshuni Tuten Chodron told us today in our reading to train ourselves to think in terms of my enlightenment depends upon this other thing or person, or all these things or people. We must train our minds to understand the value in all other sentient beings. And that way, we will be able to feel with those others as connected parts of what we UUs like to call the interdependent web of all existence. I found a different illustration, perhaps less erudite and refined, but I recall a conversation between two characters in the Star Trek Next Generation series in which Commander Riker is explaining to the android character of Commander Data how humans feel loss. Data asks, "How well did you know Lieutenant Astor?" Riker says, "We spent some time together, not very well. How well did you know her?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, you just asked me." "But why do you ask the question?" says Data. "Since her death, I have been asked several times to define how well I knew Lieutenant Astor. And I heard you ask Wesley on the bridge how well he knew Jeremy. Does the question of familiarity have some bearing on death?" Riker says, "Do you remember how we all felt when Tasha died?" Data, "I do not sense the same feeling of absence that I associate with Lieutenant Yar, although I cannot precisely say why." "Just human nature, Data." "Human nature, sir?" "We feel a loss more intensely when it's a friend." Data says, "But should not the feelings run as deep regardless of who has died?" Riker says, "Maybe they should, Data. Maybe if we felt the loss of any as keenly as we felt the death of those close to us, human history would be a lot less bloody." I will argue anybody who says Gene Roddenberry was not smart. Compassion is as universal as it is challenging. If we were able to value all others in the same way we value those whom we know well, our world might indeed be a less bloody place. Compassion requires us to set aside ourselves and our own interests in pursuit of emotional and spiritual connection with another. That is the classic conflict between Freud's id and superego, the what I want and the what I am capable of giving. Can I let down my emotional walls, the ones I erect around myself to keep me safe, and go sit with someone who is in pain, to truly share in their pain so that they know that they are not alone? That is what compassion is. It is as challenging and demanding as any of the human emotions. Compassion requires a level of selflessness that upsets our lizard brains, but it is the thing that sets us apart from the lesser creatures of the world. To connect intentionally without consideration for potential return on investment, but to give of one's heart, that is compassion. And how are we doing with compassion these days? How are we valuing the experiences of our neighbors? Are we able to imagine ourselves in their places? At the mercy of invading soldiers? Or perhaps in the person of that invading soldier? Are we able to imagine ourselves in the place of someone unsure where their next meal will come from? Or someone locked in a cage apart from their children or their parents? Or pinned under the pressing knee of a racist system of law? Our capacity for compassion dictates our capacity for action. It is the thing that motivates us to the justice work we call our mission in the world. It is not a thing I can point toward and offer inspirational words that cause people to march up a hill. Compassion requires self-reflection, self-examination, and generosity of the heart. I cannot educate anyone into compassion, nor can we regulate it. So this week, what I can do is I can ask you and encourage you to consider how compassionate you can be to those around you and toward those who are far away. I want you to consider for a bit how your enlightenment might depend upon each sentient being on our planet, the ones we like and the ones we don't like. Think on that. Breathe into that challenge. I leave you with the Buddhist practice of the loving kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May we all be filled with loving kindness. Blessed be, and Amen. Our closing words today come to us from Thich Nhat Hanh. In a time of anger or despair, even when we feel overwhelmed, our love is still there. Our capacity to communicate, to forgive, to be compassionate is still there. You have to believe this. We are more than our anger. We are more than our suffering. We must recognize that we do have within us the capacity to love, to understand, to be compassionate always. I invite you to join me as we read together the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now please enjoy our musical postlude.
Okay. After worship, please remain on the call for a short coffee hour time of socializing and fellowship and for a message from our UUCSJS Board President, Melissa Hutchison. Melissa will give a brief update on the COVID-19 pandemic and will also give us more information about the annual meeting. The UU Congregation of the South Jersey Shore's annual meeting will take place on Sunday, June 21st after worship. This is the meeting where the congregation conducts its independent form of governance by electing leaders and officers and voting on a budget for the coming year. We will be doing this via Zoom, and this week we will be helping prepare members for how the meeting will work. Melissa and other board members will remain in the main room during coffee hour for a board talkback to answer your questions. Annual reports and absentee ballots are available now. Please contact Board Secretary Angela Wexler to get yours. And please take the opportunity to keep virtually connected. So here are some of the events going on this week. Of course, Sunday we have worship on Zoom at 10 a.m. Tuesday, it's Calling All Kids. Join Miss Jess for RE Lab at 3 p.m. Thursday, Common Arts for Do-It-Yourself Hearts at 7 p.m. All makers and all ages welcome. Friday, Calling All Kids for Friday Night Fun at 7 p.m. Saturday, the Buddhist Sangha at 10 a.m. Heartfulness meditation Mondays and Wednesdays at 6:25 p.m., Thursdays at 7:25 p.m., and Saturdays at 7 a.m. And finally, pastoral care. Pastoral care is available with Reverend Dawn. We warmly welcome all of you who are visiting us today. Please stay and socialize in our online social time so that we can get to know each other better. Now, let us share in a moment of silent reflection to consider today's message and the meaning it has in our lives.